This is quickly becoming one of my favorite collections to visit in London. I'm Jessica, the Museum Guide, and today I'm at the Wallace Collection for its beautiful art and its beautiful Christmas decorations. This is the ultimate London tour for art lovers and Christmas lovers alike. But don't worry, this isn't just a Christmas video. This is well worth watching no matter what time of year it is, because I'm going to be covering the highlights of the world-famous Wallace collection. But if you are here during the festive season, welcome. Come with me and together we'll visit many of the rooms here at Hertford House and admire their Christmas decorations, which are so lovely. We'll also see some of the most famous objects and paintings in the collection while we're strolling, like stunning carvings, reliquaries, ceramics, and furniture. Now, for paintings, I've chosen just 10 from across the collection, but I could have easily added 30 more, 300 more. Let me know if I left out any of your favorites. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm delighted that you're here and I hope that you stick around. If you're a regular viewer, head over to my Patreon channel. There you'll find at least one extra video tour every month. Most of the paintings are upstairs where we will start our tour, and then we'll head back downstairs to see the armor and Renaissance pieces and a lot more. It's small and manageable. You can see all of it in just over an hour. It doesn't feel as overwhelming as some of London's other major institutions. Now, while the collection was mainly amassed in the 19th century, it is very much inspired by the Wunderkammer. That's the German word for a room of wonders. The 16th and 17th century trend of collecting curiosities to show off one's education, wealth, and worldliness. I'm going to give you a full history of the collection and the family behind it. But for now, I want you to know that one of the stipulations given when Lady Wallace bequeathed this collection to the nation was that nothing be added and nothing be removed. So we are visiting the collection as Lady Wallace intended. And don't worry, we'll learn all about Richard Wallace's scandalous parentage and his very interesting life. And remember, it's Christmas. I'm not going to say if he was a lover of the festive period, I just don't know. But he did like glitz and fancy things. So I'm going to guess yes. Here we go up this grand staircase. Just look at how beautiful it's decorated for Christmas. Just look at the garlands decorations running down the center of the stairs. Now that we're at the top of the stairs, next to the stunning Christmas tree, let's have a look at a quintessential Rococo piece, and one that is quite delightful. This is Madame de Pompadour, and there are so many paintings of her in the galleries around France and England. She was Louis XV's favorite mistress and royal advisor. Just look at this massive piece that hangs in the National Gallery. And it's said that even Casanova was impressed by her. Her real name, funnily enough, was Jean Antoinette Poisson. That's right, Jean Fish. But remember, she was a madame. She was married to Charles Guillaume Lenormand. Now, he's mostly known for being a cuckold. Even his father gave official permission for his daughter-in-law to become the king's chief mistress. She wasn't merely a paramour, though. She used her keen political acumen to gain influence in the court and acted as the king's advisor. However, she knew that the public could be fickle to mistresses, and so she developed a widespread patronage of the arts in order to develop a positive public persona. She was always careful to be deferential to the queen. We know that this portrait was the last of several that she commissioned from Rococo master François Boucher. In the background of the painting, we can see this large sculpture known as Friendship Consoling Love, symbolizing friendship, and we can also see her ever-present spaniel Inez, who symbolized loyalty. There's a lot of other Boucher here in the collection, in these massive canvases in the stairwell, and we'll see a little bit later on as well. We are now in the study, and this room is dripping in Rococo art and design. Just look at these furniture pieces and the fireplace. This is really what sets this collection apart from something like the National Gallery or even the Louvre. Things are placed together in a palimpsest. We can see them in a room, how they may have been used for decorating. This is one of the most famous paintings in the Wallace collection. It's one of the most famous paintings in London, maybe even in the world. This is The Swing by Jean-Honoré Fragonard from Grasse in the south of France. His father was a glover and a perfumer, and the perfume company later named themselves in homage to his style. Now, don't get confused with another Fragonard I've spoken about on this channel. It's Christmas. I don't want to get too grim, but Fragonard d'Alfort Museum is really one of the most gruesome museums in Europe. The Wallace Collection is known for Rococo paintings and furniture. But what is Rococo? It's an ultra-ornate and elaborate style, popular in the early 18th century in France and then spread across Europe. It's characterized by delicate, light, and asymmetrical ornamentation that was inspired by nature. It's also very frou-frou and all about wealth and decadence in a show-offy way. This is really what the French revolutionaries later rebel against. You can almost smell the guillotine coming when you're in these rooms. In fact, much of this furniture used to belong to Marie Antoinette. I mean, just look at it. It is very over the top. This painting, though, is all about intimacy and thinly veiled eroticism during a rather conservative period. We can imagine this young man catching a glimpse up this woman's skirt, and that would have titillated audiences then, just as it does now. Her shoe flies off midair, leading us to think about the wild and tempestuous nature of love or lust. Funnily enough, though, this commission was actually refused by another court artist, Gabriel François Doyen. He thought that the subject of a tryst between a gentleman and his mistress was too unbecoming, and he recommended Fragonard instead. Look here, there's a smiling older man who's nearly hidden in the shadows on the right. He's operating the swing with a pair of ropes. The courtier who commissioned the work actually wanted this character to be a bishop. Cheeky. Now let's stay in this room. This is such a lovely painting. Oh, please go learn more about this artist from this video, Women in the National Gallery. This is Elisabeth Vigée Brun, and this painting comes from 1789. But I will tell you briefly about her now. Elisabeth Louise Vigée Brun was a court painter for Marie Antoinette. Known for her lovely portraits, she nearly came to a bloody end during the Revolution as a royal supporter, but she fled the country and finally returned 11 years later after traveling and painting all around Europe with her young daughter Julie in tow. There are two paintings by Vigée Brun here at the Wallace Collection. She was known for painting children of the wealthy, and this is the Comte d'Espagnac. But we'll focus on this delightful piece instead, Madame Perregaux. Vigée Brun was known for making her subjects look good. That's why Marie Antoinette loved her so much. So here she paints Adelaide de Praille, who became Madame Perregaux when she married banker Jean-François Perregaux. Though we might not be able to discern this at first with our 21st century eyes, Madame here is dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Vigée Brun really wanted to evoke Rubens here, as she was a great admirer of his work. And wow, just look at the arrangements in the fireplace. I mean, at first, I didn't even realize that these were for Christmas because they blend in so beautifully. I'm going to point these out a number of times during our tour. There's so much gold and gilt everywhere that it almost looks like Christmas year-round, but I'm going to point out all of the beautiful decorations that have just gone up last week. We're heading back through the study to the Boudoir cabinet, a room of wonderful 17th and 18th century miniatures, including little portraits, trinkets, and embellished snuff boxes. I particularly love this scallop-shaped enameled peacock snuff box. It's decorated in a way so that when the box is open, the lid resembles a peacock's tail in full display. Most snuff boxes don't have this kind of attention to detail. The decoration is upside down when the box is open, but for this one, it is right side up. But wait, what exactly is a snuff box? Well, they would contain snuff, which was a mix of ground tobacco and scented oils. We know that this box was owned by the Duc d'Aumont, the first gentleman of the bedchamber to King Louis XV. The Duke was a well-known connoisseur of fine art. Snuff boxes like this one would have conveyed a rich sense of fashion and self-promotion. This was definitely a status symbol for him. A perfect Christmas gift. The Wallace Collection is all about beauty, and that's why it's fitting why the sponsor of today's video is Foreo, creator of the FAQ 202 silicone LED face mask. They're offering huge savings right now, just in time for the holidays. And while I don't trade on my looks, maybe like Madame de Pompadour, I try to do my best, but I also believe in science-based evidence. And honestly, that is why I genuinely recommend the FAQ 202 mask. I've been using it for about 6 weeks now, and I notice a real difference in my face. My skin is a lot smoother and softer. That's because the FAQ 202 uses 8 different wavelengths, including NIR, and it's the most effective light treatment on the market for penetrating the skin. It can effectively address tons of skin concerns like wrinkles, redness, acne, and hyperpigmentation with clinically proven results. I just pop it on while I'm editing or getting ready to guide a tour. It's wireless, so it doesn't interfere with how I can move around. I connect my Foreo mask to their app for preset treatments to tackle my specific skin concerns, but you can also use it without the app. Foreo is offering some pretty amazing holiday deals right now. You can click the link in my description box and enter my code MUSEUM35 for an additional 35% off on almost all Foreo products. They make the perfect holiday gift to pamper yourself or your loved ones this holiday season. Now, speaking of pampering, let's get back to this luxurious collection. Some lovely foliage and baubles in the fireplace.
This is the elegant large drawing room, done in a very seasonal green. A classic Dutch still life hangs above the fireplace. These rooms are just so incredibly decadent. And remember, visiting this museum is free. And wow, now we're in the breathtaking oval drawing room, decorated with even more Boucher pieces, Jupiter and Callisto.
You can really see how they've carefully chosen the decorations to match the theme and the colors of each room. Now let's head into the Boudoir to see a unique piece by Joshua Reynolds. Sir Joshua Reynolds, during his lifetime, was called one of the greatest painters in the history of art, but he often sacrificed creativity to please his clients. He painted more than 2,000 portraits for wealthy patrons. In the late 1750s, during the social season, he could receive 5 or 6 sitters a day each for an hour. He was fast and he commanded huge sums. However, he was also known for his paintings of children, and that's why I've chosen to include this one on our tour. This is an example of what Reynolds called his fancy pictures, depicting children in sentimental costume. Some people think that the model was his niece, but he's portraying a strawberry seller from the working classes. He has curiously removed her from an urban setting and portrayed her in kind of an exotic costume with a turban. He was very influenced by Rembrandt, which I think we can see here. And he was also a champion of what he called the grand style, which idealized the imperfect. He considered this painting rather experimental, and it remained in his own collection until his death. He really loved it. Let's head next door to the West Room. We can't do my man Gainsborough dirty by talking about his artistic rival, Reynolds, and not him. I'm only half joking. While the two men were rivals, they did hold each other in high esteem. Hopefully Gainsborough forgave Reynolds for edging him out to become the principal painter to the king when Allan Ramsay died. Reynolds actually threatened to quit the Royal Academy if he didn't get the job, so he was a bit of a drama queen. But my love has always been with Gainsborough. He too was a legendary portraitist in the mid-18th century, and I don't think anyone paints portraits quite like him. This is Mary Robinson, one of the best-known actresses and writers of the 18th century, the subject of countless portraits and caricatures, and 3 portraits here in the Wallace Collection. After she became famous in The Winter's Tale, she kept the nickname Perdita. She also caught the eye of the Prince of Wales, later King George IV, while she was in that play. They had a brief but notorious affair. She was already married, after all. He commissioned this portrait in 1781, and we can see that she's holding a miniature portrait of the prince. When the prince ended the affair, she sought financial compensation, and she eventually resorted to blackmail, which was successful. Well, not too successful, because we're talking about it today. That George IV was so messy. He's a lot of fun to gossip about. Today we can see it for what it is. It's a masterpiece, but Gainsborough actually withdrew this portrait from the Royal Academy exhibition in 1782 because critics were upset that it didn't convey Mary's exact physical likeness. This one was unfavorably compared to the portraits by Reynolds and Romney. How very dare they? I think this is superior. Now we're walking through the West Galleries. You can see that some of the treasures need to be kept in lower light, so we can lift up these leather flaps to see what's underneath. Let's jump ahead a bit in time to have a look at Ary Scheffer. Now, you might not know Ary Scheffer's name, and it is true. He isn't a household name like many others on this tour. However, he was a favorite of Vincent van Gogh. I'm going to explain this in depth a bit later on, but before this house was ready, Wallace displayed his pieces at the Bethnal Green Museum. Wallace was smart. 5 million people went to see those pieces over the span of 2 years, and it drummed up immense interest, including from a young Vincent who was living in London.
Now, behind me is actually the more famous Ari Scheffer piece, but it was this one here that Van Gogh was more taken by.
Vincent wrote back to his brother Theo about the pictures, particularly this one. Though it was not very famous, he was very taken by it. He was not yet a painter, and this was one of the paintings that sparked his interest in becoming one. It depicts Margaret at the fountain. It's taken from Goethe's Faust I, written in 1808. Scheffer painted 8 scenes from Faust between 1831 and 1858, of which this one was the last. Margaret has been seduced by Faust and is pregnant by him, but she has just been told by Elisabeth that their unmarried friend Barbara is pregnant. She realizes that she would have condemned Barbara in the past, but now she thinks the reproach and sin are mine. She is deep in thought. Look, the jug is overflowing, and we can see these other women gossiping about her. Vincent wrote to Theo, "Was there a purer being than this girl who loved so much?"
You know, of course, I say this in nearly every museum I visit, especially fine art museums, but this is truly an embarrassment of riches. We just don't have time to look at everything. You can see as I'm opening up these leather flaps, revealing pieces of art, sculpture, jewelry that can't handle being in the light every day. It's just opening up a whole world of treasures, more than meets the eye.
All right, it's time to visit the Grand Gallery. The Grand Gallery was specially built by Richard Wallace to house this collection's finest works, and it's beautifully decorated for Christmas right now. The large scale of the room and all of the natural light streaming in makes this the ideal venue for some of the most important masterpieces. So here we can view Rembrandt, Rubens, Poussin, Velázquez, Titian, and more. Wallace knew that this was the showstopper, and so he decided that this should be the final room when you're visiting this house, but we're visiting it halfway through our tour today. Look at the wonderful Caravaggio Christmas bauble. We're going to visit Caravaggio at the end of our tour. Most things here are 17th century, but there are exceptions, like this one, the oldest piece that we'll talk about today, Perseus and Andromeda, by the Italian Renaissance artist Titian, painted between 1554 and 1556. It was part of a series of paintings he was working on called Poetry, for King Philip II of Spain. The subject matter hails from the Roman poet Ovid's Metamorphoses. We could see the hero Perseus flying through the air as he gets ready to fight a sea monster sent by Poseidon or maybe Zeus to kill Andromeda. We can see Andromeda chained to a cliff. She's been placed here as a sacrifice to the monster who's already been wounded on the shoulder by Perseus.
As you can see, it's a very popular subject matter. Here's another painting, this one French, from the 18th century. This guy reminds me of Falcour.
Okay, along with the swing, this is definitely the most famous painting in the Wallace collection. It's the most well-known painting by Frans Hals, the Golden Age Dutch master from Haarlem, a town near Amsterdam. Despite its title, this unknown gentleman is neither laughing nor a cavalier, that is, a supporter of Charles I during the English Civil Wars. Those wars occurred decades after this was painted. Its title is actually an invention of the Victorian press, while this popular painting was displayed at the Bethnal Green Museum. So, who is he? Well, throughout his clothing, we can see lovers' knots and arrows. In the 16th and 17th century, these were used as common symbols of the joy and pain of romance. We can also see a caduceus, that is, the staff carried by the Greek god Hermes. Today, we mainly associate this with the medical profession because the U.S. Army Medical Corps adopted it as their symbol in 1902, but traditionally it symboled the merchant class and trade. Medicine is more accurately represented by the rod of Asclepius. Now, this man is obviously quite confident, maybe even a bit rakish, and with a good sense of humor. That's as much as we know. He was maybe a funny merchant.
And of course, a good 17th century gentleman wouldn't be without his pomander. That's a little kind of perfume ball that he can use to sniff to ward away bad smells, but also prevent the plague. Doesn't actually prevent the plague.
Okay, this is a rather somber piece, painted in 1640 by Spain's legendary court painter, Diego Velázquez. This is Lady with a Fan, and while the sitter is actually unknown, it might depict Marie de Rohan, the Duchess de Chevreuse. She's a fascinating character, the daughter of a French nobleman and herself a courtier, known for gossip and spreading political conspiracy theories. We can see that she is wearing a black lace veil on her head and a dark dress with a low-cut bodice. This was the French fashion of the day, lending credence to this theory. A famous story about her states that she once disguised herself as a man to escape France, where she had been stirring up political trouble, and then she lived in Madrid under the protection of the Spanish king. Perhaps this is why Velázquez depicts her gloved hand ready to draw her mantilla across to hide her face. But detractors of this theory argue that this painting really looks nothing like portraits of Marie. It's yet another enigmatic painting here at the Wallace Collection.
There's actually quite a lot of Rembrandt here. There's quite a lot of Rembrandt everywhere. He painted a lot to try to pay off his debts.
Okay, we're about to leave the very Christmassy Great Gallery, but first, let's have a look at a few Rembrandt paintings hung here. This is the wealthy Amsterdam merchant Jean Pellicon and his son Caspar, and then here is his wife Susanna van Collen and their daughter Anna, painted in 1632.
Well, this painting says Rembrandt in studio. Her face is definitely a Rembrandt face.
But now let's move on to the East Galleries, where we can see a few smaller pieces by Rembrandt, including this wonderful self-portrait. Many paintings by the legendary Dutch painter have had their authenticity questioned. I mean, after all, his work fetches incredibly high prices at auction, and he was hugely prolific, but he also had a big workshop who were painting some of the pieces for him. But this work, it never comes under question. This is a tender and moving portrait of Rembrandt's only surviving child, Titus, at about age 16. Titus would go on to become a vital part of Rembrandt's business, especially after a massive scandal involving his late mother's estate. He essentially ran a dummy company to allow his father to sell work after the authorities were trying to seize his father's assets. Rembrandt was terrible with money. Okay, so we've already seen Elisabeth Vigée Lebrun dress her subject in clothing from centuries past. In the 1780s, remember, she had Madame Perregaux in clothing from the 17th century. But here we are in the 17th century, and Rembrandt has his son dressed in 16th century Venetian costume. I always think of this a bit like the old-timey Western photos that you can get at county fairs.
Again, look above the doors for these beautiful garlands.
The festive pops of decoration are really elevating the art.
This is the smoking room where Sir Richard Wallace would entertain his male guests after dinner. In his day, the entire room was decorated with blue and white tiles, which, despite being Turkish in style, were made in Stoke-on-Trent.
By the way, normally this statue is here on the plinth.
There's a lot of majolica in here, or majolica, depending on how you prefer to pronounce it, as well as these stunning Asian incense burners. The room is so connected to who Richard Wallace was, so now it's a good time to talk about the history of this collection and his life. The Wallace Collection is a national museum, which means it is free. The origins of this collection were acquired in the 18th century by the first and second marquises of Hertford, and then the third marquis who started collecting seriously. He was a friend of the Prince Regent, later King George IV, remember, here he is, we've seen him a lot, and the third Marquis acquired a lot of 17th century Dutch paintings, French furniture, gilt bronzes, and Sèvres porcelain. By the way, a Marquis is a rank of nobility in the British peerage. I'm not mispronouncing Marquis. A marquis sits below a duke and above an earl, and they're historically responsible for guarding frontier territories which were called marches. That's where marquis comes from. Now his son, the fourth Marquis of Hertford, was also an avid collector, even though he was raised in Paris by his mother Maria Fagnini away from his father. He was enormously wealthy, collecting annual rents from estates throughout the country and Ireland. Though he was never married, he did likely have a son with a married woman, Agnes Jackson, and that son was our man, Sir Richard Wallace, which was his mother's maiden name. A lot of this gets pretty messy. Richard Wallace was mainly raised by his grandmother, Maria, and there are conflicting reports about his actual paternity, and that's probably because the fourth Marquis was what my grandma would have called a real piece of work. According to the Goncourt brothers, who were French writers and who gave their name to the Paris metro station, the fourth Marquis was a, quote, complete, absolute, unashamed monster, who once proudly declared that, quote, when I die, I shall at least have the consolation of knowing that I have never rendered anyone a service. Well, joke's on him, because we're viewing his art for free. The fourth Marquis was an avowed Francophile. I mean, he grew up there, and he especially loved to collect objects of the Rococo period, like we've talked about. His son Richard Wallace then added pieces of applied arts, Venetian glass, ceramics, and one of the finest collections of armour in Britain, if not the world. Father and illegitimate son, maybe? They mostly used this, their ancestral home, as a warehouse for their art, but they had many other properties across Paris, England, and Ireland. The fourth Marquis died in 1870 in Paris, here at his residence at 2 Rue Laffitte. Even though Richard Wallace was his secretary and his son, let's be honest, he was not a legitimate issue, so his titles passed to his second cousin. Instead, Richard inherited his art collection, which I think is a much better trade, and then the fifth Marquis allowed him to take over the lease of Hertford House here on Manchester Square. Richard also acquired a baronet title via his mother Agnes's family. In 1871, Richard Wallace was knighted for his charitable services during the siege of Paris that occurred during the Franco-Prussian War. Rather than flee the city, like his father would have done, he instead organized field hospitals. He also did something that you might recognize. Before leaving Paris, he presented that city with 50 cast iron fountains to give the public clean drinking water. They were drinking from the Seine, which was filthy, and people were getting cholera and getting very ill. These fountains became known as Les Wallace. Here is one here in the garden of the museum. I see these all the time in Paris. I knew they were called Wallace fountains. I didn't know the connection. He became quite well known for his fountains. Here he is being caricatured as one. In 1872 to 75, while he was carrying out extensive renovations to this building so it could accommodate his collection being brought from France, he loaned more than 2,000 works of art to the Bethnal Green Museum in the East End. Remember, that's where Vincent saw the Ari Scheffer painting. Around this time, after the death of his domineering father, he also married his mistress of 30 years, Julie Amélie. They had been forbidden to marry by the fourth Marquis, despite having their own illegitimate son. However, Wallace wasn't able to convince Queen Victoria to make his son legitimate after the fact, even though he was now married to his child's mother, so he wasn't able to pass his baronetcy down. This vexed him, and he spent his final days in Paris, where he's buried in Père Lachaise. Richard Wallace bequeathed his property to his widow, Lady Wallace, and then when she died in 1897, she left this collection to the nation, although she did leave a lot of Wallace's collection and huge fortune to their shared secretary. I wish we could also see those pieces here. So we're here in the smoking room to talk about a piece that Richard Wallace loved, the Toilet of Bathsheba. And by toilet, I don't mean the commode. It refers more to the act of bathing. We talked about this story in my video on the 20 must-see paintings at the Louvre. That was the Rembrandt version. Now, this high-relief sculpture was carved by Francis van Boishout at the end of the 17th century. We can see how he takes advantage of the curve of the ivory tusk. Now, the story comes from the second book of Samuel, in which King David spies on Bathsheba as she emerges from the bath. You can see him here in the background up on the roof of the palace. Bathsheba is the wife of his general. We can see her maid braiding her hair, and here the old woman sent by David offers her a casket full of jewelry, whispering David's wishes into her ear. Now, this work was often paired with another erotic Old Testament subject, Susanna and the Elders, as kind of a titillating yet pious duo, and that one is now at the Getty in LA. This piece was once sold in a lot with Frans Hals' The Laughing Cavalier at auction, and it fetched 3 times the price of that now very famous painting.
Now we're in the 16th century gallery. I mean, look at all of these treasures. There's some medieval stuff in here too. You know that's my favorite. We'll take a look at a few things, but this is a true treasure trove of beauty, really the Wunderkammer we spoke about at the beginning of the tour. But let's make our way over to this central case to have a look at this miniature altarpiece. It's 40 centimeters tall, that is, nearly 16 inches, and it's 500 years old. It's a triptych made up of boxwood, a triptych because it opens up into 3 different panels. It's kind of a mini version of a Gothic altarpiece, the kind you would see in a cathedral. Look at these. These are ogee arches, which are very curvy arches. Beautiful Gothic windows and the stunning tracery. It really feels like we're in the church. On the back of the altarpiece, we can see scenes from the Old Testament, including the creation of Eve and then Adam and Eve's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And then on the inside, it's from the New Testament, with the adoration of the Magi in the center, very fitting for our Christmas tour. The Holy Family is here inside the arched manger. This was created by Adam Dirks. He's a pretty mysterious guy. We don't know much about him, only that he made these beautiful things. The Wallace Collection also holds these 2 prayer nuts back in the smoking room. They're from Dirk's workshop as well. They're so neat. Highly intricate boxwood beads, just a few inches in diameter, that open up into scenes. Again, this is another kind of portable devotional. You can take it from place to place. I've got some prayer nuts like this in my video on the Rijksmuseum. Now, this altarpiece must have been pretty important to Wallace because it's pictured here in this painting of some of his favorite things. Sadly, this painting isn't here at the Wallace Collection. It's in Germany. I shouldn't laugh. Now I know how others feel when they complain that their precious objects are held here in England. I really wish we had this at the Wallace Collection. Now, this is one heck of a horn. It's the horn of St Hubert. St Hubert was a Christian saint who became the first bishop of Liège in 708, and he was known to cure those afflicted with rabies by using a key like this. This is a key of St Hubert. This is actually so cool because it did work, kind of. Sometimes, which is better than most early medieval medicine. See, the key was heated and pressed onto the area where the person had been bitten by a dog suspected of having rabies. And if this happened soon after a person was bitten, the heat might cauterize and sterilize the wound, which would potentially eradicate the rabies. Keys of St Hubert were used right up until the late 19th century. But while St Hubert was associated with rabies, he is also the patron saint of hunting. While hunting in the Ardennes forest, Hubert was pursuing a stag when the animal stopped. To his astonishment, a radiant crucifix appeared between the stag's antlers. Now, some say that the saint was using this very horn when he experienced his vision of a crucifix, and it's called one of his relics. Could it really be that old, though? I mean, experts are dubious. Horns like this one were used to signal at the chase and in battle. They could be lavishly decorated. This one was once decorated with silver and gold. Speaking of reliquaries and relics, this is the reliquary bell of St Mura, a beautifully crafted bronze handbell dating to the 11th century, with this rock crystal cross and gilded silver embellishments likely added in the 16th century. It has deep cultural and religious significance in Ireland. We'll come back to that. Now, this brass strip that was later covered with this strip of silver, but you can see it's been peeled away, has this Viking-inspired ornamentation. It does date back to the 11th century. It is thought to come from the Abbey of Fahan in the County Donegal, where St Mura, who lived from about 550 to 645, was this first abbot. It's long believed to be his bell, but it was likely crafted centuries later. Abbots used bells like this to call monks for prayer and meals or for devotions. At some point, they were enshrined and placed into decorative metal boxes, or in this case, the bell itself became the relic and the ornaments applied to the surface. The bell's traditionally thought to relieve pain and suffering, and pregnant women would drink from it in the hope of a painless birth. Later, care for these relics in Ireland was entrusted to lay individuals or families called keepers. They were tasked over generations with the guardianship of Irish relics or their reliquaries, and they kept them safe through Viking raids, the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII, and so many other historic upheavals. However, it was during the Great Famine of 1845 that the bell was finally sold. The final Irish keeper was a poor fisherman who sold it for £6. While the British didn't cause the famine, they certainly mismanaged any attempt to save people. And in this case, we can see that some people swooped in and made money from desperation. Appallingly, the fourth Marquess, who owned sizable chunks of land in Ireland, purposely chose to do nothing to help when the famine reached the region that he owned, and the more than 4,000 people living on his lands suffered brutally through the famine. His son, though, remember, was known for his charitable acts, but that didn't stop him from buying the bell in 1879 when he could have restored it to its ancestral owners. And the bell, well, here it is in the collection.
One of the things that the Wallace Collection is really known for throughout the year is its medieval armour and armour from around the world. It has a massive collection of swords and guns and mail coats, horses' saddles, and much more. Beautifully decorated tilting shield and horses' saddles.
Wallace clearly had a special interest in armor. I mean, just look at this collection. He was fascinated by the art behind the armor. He believed that we should view these pieces as expressive Renaissance art, not just functional objects. all kinds of armor. I mean, just look at these wonderfully evocative masks and these pieces of armor for a horse. Wow. But back in room 1, we have some pieces that don't really fit in here. Rather incongruously, in this room, we can see the gold trophy head from the royal palace of the Asante king, Kofi Karikari, in what is present-day Ghana. Now let's be clear, Richard Wallace purchased this head along with swords, knives, rings, and neck chains legally in 1874. However, somewhere along the art market supply chain, someone purchased it from a soldier who had stolen it. This hoard of stunning gold was looted just 1 year earlier by British troops during the Third Anglo-Asante War, during a punitive raid against the Asante people. This is so similar to the Benin bronzes in the British Museum. And the British Museum has their own hoard of Asante gold. More on that in a minute. Now, this is considered the finest single item of any Asante gold in any public collection. It's very unique. First of all, it weighs a staggering 1.36 kilos. That's like 3 pounds. And it was cast in the 18th or 19th century with features that suggest the head is neither the king nor any other Asante male. It's actually thought to be the head of an enemy. That's why it's called the trophy head. And it was originally attached to a ceremonial sword with a small loop. Well, no official request for repatriation by the Asante Hene, that is the king, has been made since the 1970s. There have been informal talks. And just last year, the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum arranged for a long-term loan. Here you can see some of the objects being presented to the king. No word on whether the Wallace collection will follow suit, although it would be difficult. Remember, the Wallace bequest came with the stipulation that the collection remain intact. Let's get back to the armor. But this is the most famous piece of armor in the Wallace collection, made in the Greenwich Royal Workshop during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, probably for Thomas Sackville, Lord Buckhurst. We can see this drawing in an inventory of the armory from 1565. I wondered why it was considered so famous, but then I came and looked at it up close. I mean, just look. It's etched with fine details using a zigzag and gouache pattern. Gouache is a decorative technique in which a very precise repetitive pattern is engraved using an engine, either operated by hand or mechanically. Now, let's look at the Bourgogne. That's the fancy name for the helmet, aka the skull. This has a triple barred face guard made in one piece and hinged cheek pieces. And this is the gorget. This is the collar to protect the throat, from the old French word for throat, gorge. And that's so interesting because we still kind of have this in English. Think about it. Your gorge rising, or to gorge on something. Now look at the breastplate. It has a peas cod form. This terminology, I love it. It means it comes to the point at a stomach like this. These are the pauldrons for protecting the shoulders. Again, you can kind of hear epaulette, pauldron, the etymology there, and the vambraces for protecting the wrists. And look at the fingered gauntlets here. Look at the flappy fingers. These allow for a lot of movement. The front skirt and tassets have 4 lames, that is, these panels, which are attached with internal leathers. You can see the internal leathers here. The whole thing is designed to accentuate the voluminous form of Elizabethan trunkhosen. And then the cuisses are made of 8 articulating plates to protect the thighs, and these hinged greaves protect your shins. Finally, these might be my favorite, the sabatons. They protect the foot, and they slot into these stirrups. I feel like I learned a whole new language there. Okay, time to leave the armor and head back into the decadent French Rococo period that the Wallace collection is known for. We're back on the ground floor now, remember, and we're wandering through the dining room. Again, just notice all the beautiful Christmas decorations. You can just look out here. There's a beautiful cafe with some seriously good cake. It's worth building some time into your visit to stop here for some refreshments. And now this is the impressive back stateroom. Now, the works here were collected by Louis XV and Madame de Pompadour. Again, even though they were not married, she really acted as a first lady in many ways. This room is filled with exquisite pottery, including the Sèvres porcelain. These flamboyant vases were designed by Jean-Claude Chambellan Duplessis the Elder in 1756. They're called the vases à tête d'éléphant, elephant heads. The elephant heads were probably based on the post-mortem accounts of Louis XIV's own elephant. Just look at how detailed they are. Even their trunks are nice and wrinkly, and their eyes have golden hairs. The trunks can also be used as candle holders. This is a type of pottery called Sèvres porcelain. It's exquisite, high-quality French porcelain made at this royal factory in Sèvres, France. They have their own museum. Very few of these elephant head vases were actually ever made because they are really quite fiddly, but the Wallace collection has quite a few. This is actually considered the finest collection of these vases in the world. Now let's head downstairs to our final stop on the tour. I've really saved a showstopper for you for last. We're so lucky to have this extra special inclusion on our Christmas tour today. Caravaggio's Victoria's Cupid is a temporary exhibition here at the Wallace Collection, and it is free. It's centered around one painting, with 2 additional sculptures taken from other places in the museum. Together, all 3 of these once belonged to the same 17th century collector, Marchese Vincenzo Giustiani, in his Grand Palazzo in Rome. The painting, which is also known as Amor Vincit Omnia, shows Cupid, the Roman god of desire, as a young boy. But he has dark, eagle-like wings. By the way, this prop was actually lent to Caravaggio by Orazio Gentileschi, Artemisia Gentileschi's father. And Cupid here is holding 2 arrows. Look here, he's surrounded by symbols of human achievement that he's kind of trampling on. A violin and a lute, armor, fitting, a coronet, square and compasses, pens and manuscripts, and even bay leaves, which symbolized poetic excellence. They're all trampled under his foot. The manuscript on the floor features a large V in the margin, likely referencing Giustiani, who commissioned the painting and reportedly valued Victoria's Cupid most highly in his collection. Now, this is on special loan from the Gemälde Gallery in Berlin and will be on display until the 12th of April, 2026.
Well, that's the end of our tour. I hope that it's inspired you to make your own pilgrimage here to the Wallace Collection next Christmas. I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum. Merry Christmas, everyone.